wingsradio.org. Wings thanks our supporters, including your local community radio.
Good afternoon and welcome to The Road to Recovery, The Road to Freedom with Mark. This is my 28-minute slot every Friday where I do my little thing, my little talk on depression, and read you one of my stories from before I really got struck down with depression. I mean, I pretty much still suffered from depression in those days, but it wasn't as severe as what it became later on, and I had some great times. I travelled the world for 7.5 years. I lived in London for 5 years, spent a couple of years out in Africa. Had some amazing adventures, some wonderful times. I left home when I was 21 and got back when I was 29, so almost all my 20s I spent overseas. And toured Europe, got as far as Turkey, did 5 tours of the continent, European that is, and a bit of time in Southeast Asia, Australia, a few other odd places like Mauritius. Very interesting times. And I travelled with some great mates who are my friends to this day, and we've been friends since we were kids, and they're my oldest and dearest friends. And, you know, I came to know them so well that we will be friends till the day we die. And those are the sort of bonds that you can create if you're lucky enough. And if you're suffering from depression, I cannot emphasise how important it is to have support, to have friends. It's not always easy. Sometimes you become very isolated. That is the nature of depression. And you really have to make the effort. And that is very, very hard when you're depressed. You know, you tend to isolate yourself, and it's a very awkward, difficult situation. But, you know, the effort is well worth it if you try. You will be rewarded. You will be disappointed too. You know, I've lost a few friends in the last 6 months. And that's just the way it goes sometimes. You just got to get up and dust yourself off and keep on keeping on, you know. And I didn't get to bed till 5 this morning. That's the other thing that depression can do. It's a wicked thing. If you're an insomniac, you know, you suffer from insomnia, that is, it's exhausting. You're physically, mentally unwell, and you struggle. So that's something that you've really got to work on, and there aren't a lot of drugs that can help. The stuff like Zopicone, but my doctor won't even prescribe it because it's addictive. So I have to struggle on any way I can, and it's very, very difficult, I find, especially in winter, to get up early in the morning. It's so cold, there's nothing to do, nowhere to go, no money, so, you know, you tend to sleep in until 10 o'clock in the morning, you know, and even later sometimes. So that becomes a problem. But, you know, if you can, try as hard as you can to get up earlier in the morning, and that way you can get to sleep at night. And sleep is absolutely imperative. I mean, that is as important as getting prescribed good drugs. And, you know, depression is different for everybody, different degrees. Some people get voices in their head. I did for a while, and that is absolutely terrible when you get things like that happening. But fortunately, I'm sort of over the hump a little bit as far as that goes. But, you know, there's highs and lows, and what you've got to remind yourself is when you do get low, that it's not forever. You know, it will pass, and sometimes you've just got to hold on to hope and ride out the storm. So the main thing is get decent sleep, see a doctor, get some decent drugs prescribed, and rely on your friends if you possibly can. Family too can help, and they can be the difference makers in your life. Well, on with the show and on with the story. Today's story is Stewart Island and the Milford Track. Let's kick it off. Many years ago, when I was married, My wife and I took our Christmas break early and decided to head down to Stewart Island for a week. We didn't have much time, so we decided to fly as directly as possible from Wellington. My wife Leonie was very organised and booked flights and accommodation well ahead of time. We flew directly from Wellington to Christchurch, then transferred to a smaller plane to Invercargill. We arrived in Invercargill on a Sunday, and it felt like a real step back in time to find everything closed, with the exception of just one bar. We refuelled there and transferred to an even smaller plane for the flight to Stewart Island. The plane seated only about 12 people and was extremely noisy. Suddenly it became apparent just how isolated the island really was. That same plane ran out of fuel on the flight over about a year later with the loss of one life. I remember shouting over the engine noise just how concerned I was at the time we flew over. Provo Strait is far wider than it looks on a map, and Stewart Island looks much larger. I could not wait to get off the plane and was glad to finally see the mown grass strip. The weather was in our favour, yet I felt glad we had chosen the plane over the ferry across from Bluff. We were met at the plane by a bus that drove us down to Half Moon Bay, the small community of 500 people living permanently on the island. There were very few shops, and life mainly circulated around the pub, a new coffee shop, and the Department of Conservation Information Centre. Our accommodation on Stewart Island was only a short walk up the hill from the township. It was nothing flash, but featured a bush backdrop that was full of birds. Wood pigeons and tui were especially prolific and lined up in their dozens on power lines. The bush they lived in was extremely dense native and had not been ravaged by goats and possums like the mainland bush had been. I had never seen bush so solid, dark and foreboding. There is a track around the island, but it takes 10 days to tramp and is reputed to be very difficult and muddy. We decided instead to see what Half Moon Bay had to offer and have a relaxing time discovering for ourselves the bay's history and development. The home comforts of a good bed and a handy pub and restaurant won hands down. The restaurant featured fresh local produce like blue cod, which is a prolific fish in these parts, and had a real melt-in-the-mouth quality. On our first day on the island, we gathered information of what was available and enjoyed the small township of Half Moon Bay and the surrounding bush. The pub was a real focal point of the town, and our dinner there was one of the finest I have ever had. Our second day was spent touring nearby points of interest by water taxi. The amount of wildlife and untouched beauty of the water and bush were unbelievable. Wildlife was particularly prolific and seemed to show little fear at our presence. At one spot we saw the remnants of a bushmill that was set up a century ago. Some skilled and determined souls had sailed in a steamship and run it aground there. They then stripped out the engine to use it for a saw pit they built. They then laid train tracks down as they felled the mature and beautiful rimu trees that grew there. They then rebuilt and refloated their ship, loaded it full of rimu logs, and sailed out, leaving behind the tracks and saw pit to be reclaimed by the bush. All around, seals, penguins, shags, and other birds were prolific. It was hard to believe we were still in the same country. On the third day, we went fishing on a charter boat. I was glad I had carted my own fishing gear down, as the stuff on the boat looked as if it had come off the ark. First few spots turned up some smallish trumpeter, but then we hit a patch of blue cod. They were so prolific I was pulling them in 3 at a time and caught my legal limit in under an hour. Those with the boats geared did not fare so well, but there was plenty to go round. Fresh blue cod is one of those meals that's hard to get sick of, and we dined like lords for days. Another day we spent on Ulva Island, which was a spot where the Department of Conservation, along with the locals' help, had been made completely pest-free. The family lived there and kept about 500 traps going to keep it so. It was a short, pleasant ferry ride to the island, and we were free to roam around for the day. It was a great privilege to see the superb wildlife around. As we wandered along quietly, Kaka came crashing playfully through the bush. Red-crowned parakeets were ever present, but harder to spot high in the trees. Weka abounded and were so tame they would pick food from my hand. The island was so abundant in native wildlife, it was a real eye-opener as to how the mainland must once have been. All right, we'll take a little bit of a break there, and I will play you a little song about depression. But it's a beautiful, beautiful song. Neil Finn, Edible Flowers.
The same thing. Everybody wants the same thing. To see another birthday. Look at all the pretty numbers. Look at all the pretty numbers scattered on the calendars. I can see my reflection. I can see my reflection in the shop window. That space, declare it if you dare tonight. Let the moment pass until another day. Bright lights dissolve like sugar deep inside you now. The same somehow. I'm hardly here at all. Yeah. All the trash and the treasure. All the trash and the treasure. All the pain and the pleasure. Taste the edible flowers. Taste the edible flowers scattered in the salad days. Who owns that space? Declare it if you dare tonight. Don't let the moment pass until like sugar deep inside you now. Still the rain keeps coming down. I'm hardly hear it all. Everything's gone quiet now. I'm hardly hear it all.
Welcome back to the Road to Recovery, the Road to Freedom with Mark. Well, times are kicking on, but I just want to say I really love the sentiment of that song. Bright lights dissolve like sugar deep inside you now. Still the rain keeps coming down, I'm hardly here at all. You know, it's amazing to think that people so talented and so able and well off, successful, can still suffer from depression, which just goes to show that it is no respecter of age, ability or station. It affects so many people. You know, I think of people like Robin Williams and Anthony Bourdain and people like that who have taken their own lives, and we lost 668 people in the last year to depression. It is a record, and it is getting worse. This government, at least, have attempted to begin to address the situation. You know, I'm not a great fan of Labour, nor am I a great fan of National, but for 10 years National did nothing, absolutely nothing. And people died, and it affected thousands and thousands of people, and nothing was done. I mean, that is pretty damn poor. At least we're making a start now, and I hope this will lead to better mental health facilities, and maybe we'll look after our people a little bit better, eh? I mean, that is the true judgment of a civilization. Not how many wealthy or successful people you have, but how well do you look after those that are vulnerable? That is the true measure of civilization. I would like to think that we live in a civilised country and that we do actually care for the old, the very young, and those suffering from health problems. They have a right to life and liberty, and most of all, the pursuit of happiness. So let's hope they get on with it. Right, we better crack on. Back with our story, Stewart Island and the Milford Track. All too soon, our stay at Stewart Island was over, leaving a wonderful lasting impression on us. We headed to Te Anau for a night before heading off to tramp the Milford Track. Our accommodation at Te Anau was top-notch and featured a spa bath. We only had the forethought to book the same place for the night we came to the end of the track. We headed to the beginning of the Milford Track by ferry, which was accompanied by an interesting history lesson by the skipper. Numbers allowed on the track each day are strictly limited, and we were only allowed one night's stay in each hut along the way. On the ferry were a mixed bunch of people of various ages. One group were taking their mum, others took their kids. Our group on the ferry were the freedom walkers, who stayed at the huts each night, as opposed to the guided walks done for people only wishing to do a day trip with a light pack. There was a reasonable level of fitness required to do the tramping either way, and I was worried about how hard it would be. The ferry landed on the shoreline at the beginning of the track, and each little group headed off at their own pace down a wide, flat path. Bush surrounding the pathway was pristine, and the clear streams were full of fat brown trout. We were amazed by the sheer beauty of the place, and my fears were relieved by an easy 3.5 hour walk in. The pathway was so flat and clear it wasn't necessary to watch where we were walking, and we found it impossible to stop gazing upwards at the beautiful bush and wildlife. We were transported to another world, and were glad for the easy walk in, as it gave us time to get used to the weight of our packs. Time flew by, and soon we had reached the first hut and cooked a meal in a well-outfitted kitchen. There were plenty of bunks too, although there were thousands of sandflies about. We had good repellent, and all the other groups of folk seemed similarly well equipped. I was nicely tired at the end of the day, and slept well in my bed, in my sleeping bag, despite the ever-present sandflies. Excuse me. The next day, we had a much longer 7 to 8 hour tramp over a lot of granite and a much narrower pathway. It was much more demanding going, but we both got through unscathed, although very tired, and a hot meal was fantastic at the end of the day. We didn't need a clock, as we soon adjusted to going to sleep at dark and rising at first light. The third day we tackled McKennon Pass, which was a steep pull up a granite mountain. It was hard going, but we were rewarded at the top with half a dozen mountain kea, which showed only a little caution, always ready to rob the unwary. The favourite trick was to drop a camera off a cliff face and fly down to play with the broken pieces. The pass was a steep granite low mountain pass, with snow at the top, yet the kea seemed to thrive in the inhospitable environment. On the way down, we followed a clear mountain creek steeply down uneven granite stairs. Our knees took a pounding, and we were soon complaining of the pain. It was a real hard tramp that day, and we were glad to finally get down off the back of the pass. We stumbled into the hut that night and cooked up a tasty freeze-dried dinner. The rest of the tramp was a doddle by comparison, being quite flat and around small lakes. We had by now got used to the weight of our packs and were able to keep moving for longer periods of time. We were also able to take in more of the rare and beautiful area, which had waterfalls pouring straight down off granite cliffs, down quickly to the lakes. There were also endless numbers of sandflies in the lower regions, and I was so happy to have some decent repellent. I could only imagine how miserable it would have been without. We chewed up the final few kilometres to the last hut of the tramp. All of the huts were really well equipped. Gas made for easy cooking and boiling water, and they had plenty of good bunk beds. This enabled each group to keep to themselves, and the kids kept out of our hair. Everyone seemed to manage the tramp quite well, even the oldest mum amongst the group. Our last day on the track was about half a day's tramp down to meet the ferry. It was a great opportunity for weary bodies to take their time and drink in the sheer beauty of the clear water and pristine bush. Good numbers of large native trees was awe-inspiring, and there were equally impressive numbers of birds they supported. I was glad to finally reach the end of the track early and having a feed before the ferry arrived. I was tired and thoroughly thrilled that I was allowed to tramp the Milford. Its rugged beauty is really something that needs to be done to be fully appreciated. As the ferry slowly pulled away, I stayed at the back, looking back to the end of the track. It felt like we had a religious type of experience, such was the beauty of the rivers and falls in McKennon Pass. We met the bus and headed back to Tiana and our much-deserved spa bath after a nice steak in town. Time seemed to fly by, and soon I was dreaming of the bush from the comfort of a good warm bed. It's funny how much you appreciate the simple luxuries of life after a few days of tramping and sleeping in huts. Although it was a shame our adventure had to come to a conclusion, we were still buzzing from our experiences. Stewart Island and the Milford Track housed very different types of bush and were wonderful and unique experiences of their own. Doing both was like having two holidays in one, and Leonie's organisation made it a wonderfully seamless experience. It has been many years now since we travelled to the far south and west to the Milford, but their impression has never left me. Like photographs in my mind, the sheer pristine beauty is burned into my memory. I feel a great sense of pride and privilege to have been able to visit such wonders. I would encourage anyone to go to Stewart Island at least, and Milford if the body still allows. They are certainly places I will always remember with a sense of awe. End. 1 minute 20 seconds to go. Not bad timing. It was great to read that story and remind myself of the wonderful, wonderful time I had down there. I haven't done all the great tracks yet. I would love to do the Hollyford and see the Catlins, and I hope to get round to that before I die. You know, so many people live in New Zealand and never get to see these things. And look, I never saw anywhere in the world that has what we've got. So if you possibly can, get out there and do it. And I mean, even the Wairarapa, we've got places like, you know, the mountains, they are absolutely beautiful. You can just go and stay down in the lower reaches and just have a picnic. Places like Castle Point, absolutely stunning, beautiful. I mean, if you're really lucky and you're sitting in the cafe having a cup of coffee, occasionally dolphins will come swimming by, you know. Beach is beautiful, the reef, the lighthouse, it's just an amazing place, really wonderful, pretty close to Masterton, and certainly worth a trip out there, even just for an afternoon. It's wonderful. Well, it's me for another week. Thank you very much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll be back with another story next week. I really look forward to that. So thanks very much, and catch you again next week. Ta-ra.